So I'm Chris O'Donnell. I built my first website on 12/31/1995.
Oh.
My wife went to bed early on New Year's Eve because she was 7 months pregnant and I had nothing else to do. So I decided I was going to launch a website in 1995, and I did push it to the server right before midnight. And sometime around 2 a.m. I figured out Linux file permission so that anybody else could see it. But it was up there. So I've been in the Drupal community about 10 years. I've worked for agencies you've probably heard of, like Elite Creative in DC, and I spent 5 years with ProNet Source out of Chicago. I currently work for Portage Cybertech, which is a Canadian agency that I'll talk about more on the next slide. I'm from Richmond, Virginia. I did not come up just for this, just by weird coincidence. I have family in Boston. I was working from my uncle's house this week. And when Leslie heard that, she told me to do a session. I'm a dog person. That's Teddy Ballgame. I'm also a Red Sox fan. And when I'm not selling Drupal sites, you'll find me up the woods camp.
Go Sox.
Okay, so about Portage real quick. If you remember open.ca, if you've been around Drupal for a while, they were sort of a well-known agency. They got bought out 18 months ago. This is who they are now. Portage Cybertech is a Canadian startup that has acquired a few companies, including us for the Drupal front end, one CRM, GhostINO Cloud, which is a digital signature, e-signature platform, and the Citizen One service catalog solution for government agencies, and combining it all into one service for sort of small and mid-sized government entities where they can get all those core pieces tightly integrated in one place. Our client base, primarily Canadian, but we have worked with Georgia Tech, University of Oregon, New York State, Wyoming, so a few people around the U.S. And now we'll get into the secret zone design. The big finish early here. It's building. Don't sell design. That's the big secret. Don't sell design. And I'm going to go to the mouse. Every time I touch this thing, maybe a different thing on my screen than up there now. There it is. Okay. All right. That's it. Any questions? All right. We'll go on. Okay. Here's the thing. Nobody buys a web design. They don't care. They're buying the results of the web design. When you walk into a car dealership, what are you really buying?
The car.
What?
The design of the car or the model.
Nope, you're not buying a car. You're buying transportation. That's what you're really buying. You're fulfilling the need to get from point A to point B. If you're me, who drives a Camry, it's literally just transportation. You're not big about it. If you're a 23-year-old developer, got his first job at Google making stupid money, and you're buying a convertible Porsche, you're buying lifestyle, you're buying status. If you're a 45-year-old recent divorced guy trading in your Camry for a convertible, you're trying to buy your youth again or something, right? But the car is just sort of, I won't say the vehicle, that's really a bad pun, but the car is just the tool that's fulfilling some need. And the need in that case, it generally is transportation or some other emotional thing. It's the same thing when you're sitting down talking to somebody about a website, or you're trying to sell a redesign of the corporate ladder internally. You really have to think about what do they really care about. Because quite frankly, they don't care about web design. They care about what that's going to do for them. So in a commercial sense, if you're iFactory working with clients, they're buying more sales. They're buying more incoming leads off the website. They might think they're buying more traffic, although we all know web design doesn't generally give you more traffic. In the government sense, you're buying cost reduction. You're buying people completing transactions online at 25 cents a transaction versus showing up at the DMV where it costs the government $85 per transaction to get that over done. Or in a marketing situation, you're buying brand alignment or something like that. But you're almost never buying web design. I mean, there are cases, maybe you're dealing directly with the CEO who just wants to redesign his website. But even in those situations, when you're talking to them, try to find something that you can kind of agree that you're fixing, because otherwise, halfway through the project, that CEO is going to get bored. If there's not like some business purpose, he'll get busy, or she'll get busy. And that's one of those projects that you'll bill half of it, and then the client just drops off the face of the earth because there was no pressing business need and something else came up. So, when you're going into these sort of situations where you're trying to convince the boss to redesign or convince a client to sign on the dotted line, you basically need three things. You have a qualified buyer. That's when the person you're talking to has the authority, the budget, so forth, to actually do the project. And I'll go more into that in detail in a second. And you have to agree, as I was just alluding to, on the problem you're solving. And you have to agree that there's a solution here that you both think is right, or the team or the committee think is right. If you don't have those three checkboxes, the contract's not getting signed, the project's not getting approved. It's just going to stall. All right. We don't really have any hardcore designers in the room, so this slide might not upset you as much, but design is not always the answer. This is the homepage, as of last week, for Berkshire Hathaway, one of the most valuable companies in the world, right? I can't even imagine how many enterprising sales guys at web agencies have tried to call into that company just sure that there was a project waiting here. This thing hasn't changed since probably 2001, other than update the links to current content. And you can see, February 25th, they're still updating this thing. If Warren Buffett walked in here right now, I don't have a good argument for why he should update this or spend $100 grand on a redesign project. I mean, I'm more of a back-end technical guy than a design guy, and personally, I think there's a lot more of the web look like this. It'd be a lot easier to use. And not getting so bogged down on home pages with JavaScript and animations and things that just sort of get in the way a lot of the times of actually, renewing your driver's license or buying the product or asking for information or whatever it is that actually brought you to that website in the first place. So, all right, back to our original question. How do you actually sell the value of design? Basically a three-step process, which we'll go through. Qualify the project or prospect. Again, understand what you are really selling. That's really the most important part here. And then you want to lead with past results. So we'll go through those one by one. Qualify. If you've ever been to a Sales 101 training, you probably heard the acronym BANT, B-A-N-T. If not, I bring new to you. It's budget, authority, need, timing. If you're talking to somebody about selling them a website project or a design project of any type, or again, trying to even move a project internally, the person you're talking to can't check all four of those boxes, you might as well be talking to a brick wall because the project's not going anywhere. Budget's kind of obvious. In a sales situation, $50,000 website, do they have $50,000 to spend on it? Internally, it's more, is it allocated in the budget? Are we going to get budget next year? That sort of thing. And I know it's hard to talk about money, but in a business-to-business sale, people are expecting it. You can just say, this looks like a $50,000 project to me. Is that what you were thinking? And just qualify it real quick up front, first phone call with somebody calling it an agency, so that you don't spend a lot of time with somebody who's never going to buy, and they don't spend a lot of time with potential vendor that's not going to be the best vendor for them. Obviously, dealing with government agencies, they oftentimes can't tell you the budget. It can be policy or even law that says they can't give budget numbers to vendors because the government thinks, well, they're just going to raise our price to the max budget. Although it doesn't really work that way. I've never won that argument with a government procurement agent yet. I don't expect to anytime soon. So in that case, you're kind of beating around the bush. How much did they spend on their last website design? If their current site's Wix or Squarespace, they're probably not spending $150,000 on a new website. So you look for those kind of clues. You look at how long they think the project's going to take. Like if they've allocated 6 weeks, so they think they're buying 6 weeks of somebody's time, they're probably not valuing 6 weeks of somebody's time at a particular high number. So it's another clue that you're talking to somebody who maybe not sort of be in a professional Drupal web design world, or more of a Squarespace or Wix customer. Authority. Can the person you're dealing with sign off on the project? Again, someone calls it Die Factory, could be this 24-year-old marketing associate through the vice president of marketing, said, go get us 5 redesign quotes from local agencies. And that's, honestly, that's fine. As long as you understand that when you're talking to that first person and you ask, how are you making the decision? VP marketing, okay. When do we get to meet with them? They say, I'm going to answer your questions, you can put a proposal together. The VP marketing is going to look them over and invite his 2 favorites in. That's a perfectly legitimate way to sell a website. I have no problem there. If they say, I'm getting 5 quotes and the VP marketing is going to pick a winner, run, quite frankly. Because in that case, quite frankly, the winner's already been picked, most of the time. This is all an exercise in justifying that decision after the fact. They already know who they're going to pick if they do it that way. Or if they really are picking that way, it's not a client you want. In most cases, they're low rent. Need. Do they really need what you're selling? And this is a hard one because if you're a web designer, it's sort of you get a hammer, right? Every project's a nail. But if you want to do what's best for the client, a lot of times they don't necessarily need what it is they called you for. People think they need to redesign their websites, and that isn't the problem usually. Oftentimes, because we all know, redesigning it's not going to double the traffic, right? There's other issues you got to deal with there. I had one last year. It was a convenience store chain out west, like 150 gas stations, and they called in. I was working for an agency based in Denver at the time, and what they said was they wanted their website to look like Wawa. They wanted to be the Wawa of the West. Well, my coworkers were like, huh? What's a Wawa? I'm from Virginia. I know Wawa well, right? And my first question to them was, why would a new website improve your convenience store? And their CEO was just like, what do you mean? I'm like, I would go out of my way to go to Wawa to get gas. But I honestly don't think I've ever been to their website. Why? The fact that it's Hoagie Fest and they're $1 cheaper this month, not changing my behavior at all. So why would someone come to your website? So my guess is people interact with your brand on Google Maps more than anything else. They type in convenience store, gas station near me. And she's like, yeah, that's a good point. Like, have you looked at your Google My Business profiles lately? We did that up to the stores. Yeah, that's what I guessed. They were a disaster. So we flipped the project from $50,000 website redesign to like $35,000 website redesign, $15,000 of getting all their Google stuff figured out. And what that did though was it kicked all the other competitors out. And from that stupid question I asked, basically, the project was won. It was all because they didn't need a website design. That wasn't going to bring in a single customer into a gas station. And then timing. Again, if they're, can you even do the project in a timeline? Is your timeline reasonable? Is it negotiable if they don't understand why, if it's not reasonable, if they don't understand the stuff, and they're fine with it taking 6 months once you explain it to them. But, you kind of don't want to really invest any serious time in any website redesign project, or any design project, you have those 4 understood, by whoever you're talking to. Because otherwise, you could just end up spending a lot of time on a project that goes nowhere. So, again, understand what it is you're actually selling this time, what they need. What are they buying? What do they need? Does web design solve their problems? Ask all the obvious questions. I know it's hard. I have a hard time, when I'm sitting down with a client, I'm supposed to be the expert, right? And the expert shouldn't ask stupid questions. But actually, that's what experts do best. They ask stupid questions. So ask all the questions, even the ones that seem dumb. Make sure you get, make them verbalize what their goals are, what their, what the project is, what the budget is. Because they may not have thought through a lot of this stuff. You'd think mid-sized, big companies would really put a lot of thought into a 6-figure website project, and you'd just be shocked how often someone just decided to do it and they threw an RFP out or called 5 vendors in the pitch, and no one's really sat down and thought, does this solve any actual problems in the company? It's more like, well, our competitor just did a big redesign to the press release, so. And again, your design company that might be okay if it's a big project. Just kind of know what you're getting into. There are no dumb questions. Ask them all. But then lead with results. And this can be hard, right? Because ultimately, nobody cares about your design thinking process. I know you've got 10 pages in your proposal and 5 slides. I do too, all right? But really, nobody cares. They care about what that gets you at the end, right? And again, the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. Not really true, but everyone believes that. So what the way you win these projects is we worked with, you're pitching, I don't know, UMass Amherst or something. We worked with Salem State. They had these exact same problems, and here's how we solved them, and here's their traffic and their enrollment numbers were up over the next 12 months and so forth and so on. If you can do that, I mean, you're going to win so much work. The problem is, it's hard to do that. Because even when you have the projects, at least in my experience, you don't have the data. You did a $250,000 redesign, and you go back to the client 6 months later, they're like, well, the traffic's up 8%. What else? It's like, it's hard to get that data. But if you can get the data, massage it out of them somehow, it's really sort of a slam dunk when you're trying to win these projects. If you don't have that client experience, which happens all the time, you got to figure out how to relate what you've done from a problem standpoint to what they need, even if it's not the same industry. It's harder, and there are definitely going to be people that are going to just dismiss you because you haven't done 5 university websites and talking to the university. You kind of can't do anything about that sometimes. But if you can say, look, we understand we have universities, but we've worked with nonprofits, and they kind of have the same problems, and here's how we solve them. And we bring in a little different perspective on how this design might solve your problems. Because it's not just, we don't have that tunnel vision on universities. You might make some leeway. My previous agency with that convenience store had never done a convenience store site. But we had done medical practices. So we spun that as multi-location work, which it was kind of a stretch, but in that case it worked. So it can work. Objections. There are 10,000 books on Amazon on top 50 sales objections, how to beat sales objections. Don't buy any of them. They're all pretty much worthless. From our standpoint, the objection is you think the project's sold, you sort of agreed up front, yeah, we can spend $50K on this, I like your approach, and you put it in writing with the proposal, get it to you next week. And then after that, suddenly, the project stops and they say it's too expensive, or there's some roadblock you just didn't see coming, you thought it was sold. That's what we're talking about by objection in this case. And really there's 2 things happening. There wasn't a qualified project. They never really had the money, and now they're just trying to tap into it. The people don't want to say they don't have the money. People don't want to say they're buying a car, and the VP of marketing doesn't want to say it when he's spending $1 million on a digital project. Or you never really agreed on the problem you thought you did. And I think this is all the same internal in the government situation too. And you never really agreed on the solution. If you did those 3 things, you're basically 95% sold before you write the proposal or do the pitch, which is kind of what you're trying to do here. So when you hit that objection, it's stop, think back to the qualification and the problem solution, sort of if you're sitting there with a client, you literally say, okay, we agreed that 50K was the budget, right? Yes. Okay. We talked about solve problems A, B, C, right? Yes. And we agreed this is how we're going to solve it, right? Yes. So what's the problem? And make them tell you, because in sort of one-on-one sales situations, people will try really hard not to tell you the truth about what the real homework is. It might simply be budget's been pulled, Q3 sales are bad, the project's being killed, but they don't want to look like they didn't have the authority or whatever, so they'll tap dance around and blame it on anything else. Or it's just a negotiating tactic, which is good news. Because there are a lot of people that just sort of feel like once they get the vendor 99% there, they got to take one more bite on you somewhere before they let you have a sale. In that case, it's either if you're confident you got it won, and you're confident there's not really anybody in second place that's close, you can just hold the ground and say, no, we did $50,000. That's what the project takes. Can't lower my price for 40, and call it bluff. If you do feel like you need to give them some kind of concession, always get something in return. One of my favorites is a commitment for referrals or references. Because references, as we all know, are kind of pain sometimes. So, okay, fine, I'll lower the price from 50 to 45. In exchange, assuming you're happy with the project, of course, you'll be a reference 6 times a year for the next 2 years, like someone wants to talk to you about working with us. Then get that into the contract. Or something like that, something that'll help you down the road. Maybe it isn't money per se, but something that'll help close the next deal. Or by the way, I know you're part of this association. Can you introduce me to direct original association after the project. That kind of thing. Just get something back so that it's not just you giving in, that it's literally a negotiation. Okay. And basic rule in any sales-focused presentation, you must reference Glengarry Glen Ross at least one time. Everyone's favorite sales movie. I personally hate the movie. Those people are so depressing. I'm going to reference it twice, because why not? Closing the sale. As you kind of figured out my approach here, by the time you're closing the sale, it's already closed. Right? You've agreed on the budget, you've agreed on the problem, you've agreed on the solution. It's now just paperwork when you're quote unquote closing the sale. So this should not be like the stressful thing that people make it out to be all the time. You're kind of closing the project every time you talk. What I kind of do is mentally, when I'm working through the sales process with somebody, sort of every time I have any kind of significant interaction, did that move things forward? Did that just kind of stall the project? Did that actually make me step back? In this case, I'll probably lose it. And just long and short of moving forward, some of these projects, and I've had government projects take 18 months in the first meeting. But they were steady, but at the speed of government, slow progress all the way through. So I wasn't worried. Watch your buying signals. When they're asking about timelines, when they're asking about when you can start, that's like they're basically telling you, without telling you, we think you can do this. So that's where you kind of, if you haven't said, okay, I agree on a contract and go, that's like sort of a signal to do that. It's sort of a one-on-one commercial selling situation when they ask that kind of thing. Don't be afraid to ask, and then more of a committee or like government sale or a big company sale where you're kind of dealing with a bunch of buyers. Don't be afraid to ask sort of your sponsor, the person you're working closely with for help. Hey, it feels like our last 3 conversations have just sort of stalled the project. What's going on? Because what's usually happening is you're stalled because you're in second place. And the team in first place is still advancing the sale to a close. So you either got to get back in the game or that one's dead. In my personal opinion, not knowing, there's nothing I hate more than investing 5 meetings and 16 hours writing an 80-page proposal, and then it just goes to a black hole and you never heard. No offense, governments are notorious for doing that to me. So chase them, in my opinion, chase them down. Keep sending emails to the procurement officer until they get sick and say what happened. Because it just, you can't learn anything from it. In the worst case, if I lose the deal, fine, you're going to lose most of them, quite frankly, in this business. But you just want to make sure you learn something every loss that will improve your next chance just a little bit. Okay, and final couple of slides, just some resources for further reading, listening, if you want to learn more. 2 Bobs is a podcast by 2 guys whose their entire business is helping creative entrepreneurs, they call them, so basically ad agencies, web agencies, that kind of thing, operate more effectively. Podcast, kind of covers everything, dealing with clients, finances, whatever, and making a creative business. But if you're a web agency owner kind of person, it's a great podcast. The Win Without Pitching Manifesto is by one of the same guys, Blair Ennis. That book is basically an advertisement for his consulting business, where he teaches ad agencies how to win the project without getting into a competitive, 5 agencies and then do their pitch, everything like on that. But it's, from a sales 101 kind of how to sell this creative, esoteric stuff thing is really good book, and it's like a really cheap book on Amazon. Basically every sales book ever written since 1930 is just taking the deal on you, put it, how to win friends and spinning it somehow. So if you haven't read that one, you should. If you feel like you struggle asking the right questions when you're sitting down with a client and kind of understand the project and move forward, then Spin Selling is a really great book. The SPIN is an acronym for situation, problem, implication, need, payoff, which are like the 4 types of questions that they say sort of all sales processes are working around. So if question asking is like something you want help with, that's not a bad book to read. It was written in the late 80s. But most of it's still pretty relevant. The Challenger Sale was sort of the next version of Spin Selling in a way by a different author in the 2000s. Snap Selling was like the first, Jill Conrad was like the first one I saw that sort of wrote a sales book from the perspective of your client, your VP marketing client, hasn't checked their voicemail in 6 months, and it's full, and they can't deal with it. They got 500 unwritten emails in their inbox. How the heck do you get their attention? How do you get the meeting? How do you get any progress when all your clients are like that? So she lays out kind of a process you can go through and trying to approach the potential client, which is pretty cool. Dan Pink, To Sell a Human, is basically a book that tries to make the point that no matter how bad you think you are at sales, you're actually really good at sales. Are you married? Well, that's basically years of selling, right? To convince someone to spend their life with you. And then all people sort of, going back to caveman days, selling is sort of basically part of being human. We're all good at it, and if we think about it that way, it makes selling sort of in the job world easier to do. And then the final one is by David Oakley, who's one of the principals of Boone Oakley, I think it is. It's an ad agency down south in Charlotte. And it's not a sales book, it's more like my life and advertising book. He's kind of a nutcase. So he's really kind of the guy that'll do some really crazy stuff walking into the pitch. So I think it's sort of inspirational, for me at least, and sort of a don't be afraid sometimes to do something stupid, in the sales meeting, especially if you're walking in knowing you're in third place, like you're pitching for a government project and you kind of know you're in third place. You kind of have to go for the home run at that point. You're not going to win. But from a staff standpoint, I always felt that was a little inspirational. Oh, and just one final slide here. Drupal GovCon is back. Leslie didn't mention earlier, probably, because it's a little farther out, November 1st and November 2nd in Bethesda, Maryland. It used to be 1,000 people pre-COVID. The space we usually use at NIH is under construction as space at MIT. All usually uses. So it's only going to be about 400 people this year, but which still makes it probably like the third or fourth biggest Drupal event in North America. So I'm on the organizing committee for that. I encourage y'all to come down to DC in the fall. We usually do this like in August or July, so November 1st and 2nd is a much better time to be in Washington, DC. The tourists are gone, the humidity's gone. And session submissions opened up actually this week. So if you're a speaker, go ahead and submit your session. It's called GovCon. It's really not a government conference. It's called GovCon because it has the government in the name. Federal government employees make it easier to get permission to go. They can just tell the boss, look, it's government related, and they go, seriously. But it's really a Drupal, it's decent Drupal. It's just it's a general purpose, larger Drupal campus. Some sessions will be many, but really there'll be nonprofits there, there'll be commercial people there. You'll see a lot of the same types of sessions you see here, or Drupal Camp New England, or at Drupal 5, whatever. And that's it. Oops. Any questions? We have plenty of time.
I have a question.
Sure.
For basically selling the product, you were talking about how you were going to ask the stupid questions before you can even know. My major question about that is, does asking those questions, do they give you a broader spectrum of how the job can go, or can it just end up changing the whole thing completely within the end?
Now, I'm going to repeat your question just so the recording here. So the question is basically, when you're asking questions, trying to scope out the project, what's the impact of what I call the stupid questions that you're afraid to ask? And yeah, exactly, that's right. I can't tell you how many times in my career I've asked what seemed like a stupid question I thought I knew the answer to, and the client just went off on a weird 90-degree tangent I didn't see coming. Which can go two ways. Sometimes it might be like, okay, well, waste my time here, they don't have the money or whatever. Or sometimes the project gets a lot bigger. Because what you thought was website redesign, and you ask something I don't know, are you guys doing any e-commerce? Oh, that's on the budget for next year. We've been looking at, and suddenly now there's an e-commerce project on your horizon too that you didn't even know existed before you asked that question. So that's why you always ask the question, even if you think you know the answer. I know lawyers always say never ask a question you don't know the answer to. In sales, it's the opposite. Always ask the questions you think you know the answer to, because the reality is most of the time you don't know the answer to the question.
I think one of the things that's important in that, as a strategist, I think this way, right? But is always getting to the business goal and the problem they're trying to solve. You spoke to that. People often come to you thinking they know what they need, and they rarely know what they need to really achieve what they want to. So if you can speak to the problem and solving the problem, you're going to get a sale.
Yep, exactly. Because if they're talking to 3 web agencies, and 2 of them just say, okay, it's 50 pages, and you need a contact form, and they go off to their quote, and you start asking about, why do you have a website? What good does it do your business? You know, what does it need to do to help you? What does it need to do to make it worth the money you're spending on it? And make them think about those things. You just won. If you're the 1 out of 3 or 4 vendors that had that conversation, you basically you're in first place. I mean, they still might not have $100 grand. That's what you want for the project, right? But you were in first place if you're the one. And you would think people who solve for a living would know this and do this, but really, 90% of the people who go into those meetings, a checklist of qualification questions to get the specs of the website, go on off and do the proposal. The one person that has that more businessy conversation is the one that will win.
This is another question that actually it's kind of like, I don't know. But the thing I wanted to ask was projects that you have maybe later in the day or later in the evening, has any of them given you problems to the point of you know for a fact this is not supposed to be happening, but you still do it anyways, or would you usually go to the client and tell them this is not going to work out, or if this is tangible or not?
Right. Yep. So the question is basically, when you're into a project and realize it's not going well, do you go back to the client and tell them that, or they signed the contract to do X, you sold your through and do X? In a perfect world, you go back to the client, right? In the real world, you're a web design freelancer, the check's coming in, you got a mortgage payment due at the end, a rent payment due at the end of the month. And, just like every other business in the world, although you theoretically should go back to the client and say, hey, we're going down the wrong road here. If they signed the contract to do that, and they're paying you to do that, the pressure to just do that sometimes is overwhelming. And a lot of people, in a lot of cases, will just continue on down the road of doing that because that's what the contract said, and that's what they're getting paid for. Because, holding it up might turn into a bigger project of the client, or, it could scare the client into canceling it too, right? That's part of the fear in the back of your head. Do I go back and tell them, this idea isn't good, this module we're building or whatever isn't going to work? Or do you just kind of go on, well, they're paying me to do this, so I'll do it? Real world is, you're going to do both depending on the situation. Probably.
I'm sure you've run into this issue. Sometimes there might be a potential client that you're trying to work with to see if you can develop a contract with. And then all of a sudden you realize, hey, this is going to be a really difficult person to work with or a company to work with, and it's probably not worth my time in the long run because it's just going to cause tragedy in my life. Is there an appropriate way to pull back from that and say, I'd rather spend my time elsewhere?
Yeah. So the question is basically, how do you deal with a potential client when you realize you don't really want them as a client? Happens all the time. There's 2 ways to deal with it. You can give them a price that makes it worth their effort. The PITA factor basically. It's like, okay, this guy's going to be a pain. I'm going to double my price. If he accepts it, it'll be worth the effort. Or, I'm sorry, just won a big contract last night. I'm going to be booked for the next 6 months. Here's 2 other agencies that are good in town. You can give them, the name of 2 guys you don't like. So you ties up their time for a while. That's how to typically handle it. Raise your price enough that they walk away, or if they still accept it, you can deal with it. Or just you're too busy.
Me personally, I've always done choice over on that one. Yeah.
What if they want only you to do it? Like,
if they only want you, then basically you should be able to name your price. There's some price where the pain will be worth it to you. If they really just want you, they should be willing to pay that price. So that's what you're quoting.
I have a specific question. I think I kind of know some of the answer, kind of being like goal oriented. But like, how do you sell a Drupal 10 migration? And specifically, the problem that we run into is that the Drupal 7 projects, where years ago, they have an amount that, they spend on that website. And then, as we know, the Drupal 10 is really more of a replatforming. And we have a lot of clients who are in a kind of a difficult situation because, they want to have security, they want to have features and improvements to their platform, but they're essentially priced out of a Drupal 10 migration, or, they have a hard time, acquiring the budget to do so. So one, how do you sell that? Or two, is it, like, to your point, is there really anything wrong with their website, I guess? And so, like, a lot of times you go the security route, the upgrade route, but even sometimes that feels kind of like hollow when we're trying to sell that. So do you have, like, kind of any advice?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is, a lot of people that built $12,000 Drupal 7 sites, from their freelancer frame in 2014, they should not go to Drupal 10. They should go to WordPress or Squarespace. And that's the reality. It goes back to the qualification issue, right? Do they really need to migrate to Drupal 10? I literally got a call a couple years ago, and it was literally Bubba's Garage. That was the name of the business. Somewhere like in the rural South Carolina, he had a 5-page Drupal 7 site that, like, the local freelancer built in 2013. Picture's garage, hours, 100% all the guy was ever going to need. That's maybe he wanted to do online appointments or something. In which case, there'd be a $20 assassin for that, right? And he had seen some news about Drupal 8 and end of life, and Drupal, I guess, contractors called us in Chicago or something. I just said, look, you don't need to go to Drupal 8, or you're going to have that. I said, your site's small, it's simple. I said, Drupal 7 was good for that. Drupal 8 is more of an enterprise thing. I said, it's overkill for you. I said, hit Craigslist, find your local contractor, and I said, if they mention WordPress, Squarespace, or Wix, they're on the right path. I said, converting your site should take them a day, maybe two. They said they really shouldn't be making any more hours than you do as a mechanic. You do good work too, so think about that in terms of how much they should charge you for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do have a specific client in mind, and it's like a higher education. It's a large university. They probably could have the budget allocated, but so they're in a situation where, like, they have a successful website, it's on Drupal 7, but end of life is coming up, like hosting is going to be an issue, and I just don't think they see the value in the platform, because I don't think they see any urgency from the security aspects and just kind of like the more technical side, because from their perspective, the website is running just fine. So in a situation like that, is that just, this is not the right client, or, necessarily the right fit? Or is there like a more persuasive way to kind of, sell them on that fact?
Yeah, it's tough when they do have the money. When it's a big business or a major university, and they have the money. And like you said, there's, it goes back to, again, figuring out what they really need. Yeah. So there's something there you don't know. Whether they are talking to Adobe or Sitecore or something about a major replatform there, and they're just sort of stringing you along to backup. But they're a big major university cannot be ignoring the fact that people stuff. If there's a VP of digital or someone like that, I tend to believe that my customers are not as dumb as they sometimes want me to think they are. But I say, no, I believe they're smart enough to know they need to move, so why aren't they? And then start digging at that. Again, usually it's weird internal politics, or they really are talking to Adobe and or WordPress shop, and those kind of stringing you along to fall back on you at some point.
So really kind of dig into those questions.
Yeah, so you got to get, maybe you're not high enough up the ladder of who you're talking to. You're talking like a sort of a day-to-day web manager. There's probably stuff going on. With the VP level,
sure.
That person may not be aware of. But yeah, I mean, at this point, I'm hard to believe in a major organization like that would really still be that sort of blind to take a separate issue. So there's something going on somewhere.
Sure.
And you may never find it. They may have decided 2 years ago to do Adobe, and they're sure it's on.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's just what it is.
Right, sure. Thank you.
Legion. What do you find works?
There are no secrets. During COVID, I sat in on a lead gen session by a woman who worked for more of a WordPress shop. It was at CMS Philadelphia. And again, I sat in on hoping she had something new. beyond pick up the phone, send the email, go to the event, and there really isn't anything new, unfortunately. And again, it's harder to get a hold of people. You know, they're busier now. It's, you know, no one answers the phone. I mean, I personally believe cold calling first. Nobody answers their phone. I'm in sales. I don't answer my phone. You know, if I see a number, I'm like, it's like if they're a real prospect, they'll leave a message.
And the perception is also, you know, it's,
I
I
mean-
think when you're getting phone calls from salespeople too.
Right. I mean, email can work. A direct email can work if it's literally a direct custom email. You know, I saw you speak at this conference. You're talking about X, Y, and Z. That's what we do. You know, that kind of thing. Or, you know, we redid the website for, you know, Georgia State University, and you're the VP of Georgia Tech. You know, you have that kind of automatic relevance. You know, that kind of email will occasionally get you, yeah, sure, let's have a conversation response. I mean, it's still, hit rate's pretty low, but it will occasionally work. But yeah, on lead gen, nothing's really, it's just gotten worse. So no one's figured anything better out, as far as I can tell.
And along the same lines, RFP responses.
I actually had a slide for RFPs, and I took it out. Yeah, you have to know how to play the RFP. It's kind of what I do, or what I did before this job. I'm more of a tech guy here, but for the last 10 years, I mostly spent most of my time responding to RFPs. And it's really about only responding to the ones that you have a fair shot at. So you've got to be brutal in analyzing them up front and throwing out almost all of them. In the Drupal world, if they have Drupal and they're upgrading, great. In the government, my rule with government RFPs is if they don't state a preference for open source, I don't bother. Because there's always going to be some proprietary solution focused on that little angle of the business or government that's going to be cheaper. It's going to be so much cheaper, it's going to be no brainer for them. There's a vertical solution for everything, you know, templated, boom, boom, boom. So you really have to fill out in the government world with an RFP. I would never do a private sector RFP, by the way. You know, because those are 100% always justifying some decision they already made. Always. Except for like, I mean, if the big company in town invites like the 5 big web shops in town to compete for something, fine. Or like you just randomly find an RFP email from, you know, some local company. So RFPs are free, mostly government. And then it's then about convincing yourself that they want Drupal, or at least having a preference towards Drupal/WordPress, and that, you know, they'll spend what it takes to build a great government Drupal. I mean, they'll often tell you the budget, or give you an idea, so that sometimes is pretty easy. Or you can kind of guess by the way the RFP is written, or so what the previous site looks like. So you kind of get the budget part figured out pretty good. You know, the need part, it's in RFPs, and clearly the website, so that part's figured out. So it really comes down to you gauging, are they really going to spend $150,000, $500,000, $2 million, whatever it's going to take on some huge Drupal project? You think they are, and you're convinced that they're not just doing this to justify giving the contract back to the company's been there for 5 years already. Procurement will make them, you know, do an RFP. And the real team that works on it, all they want to do is stay with the current vendor because they're awesome. So you got to kind of try to sniff that out too. You can tell the RFP is like really. If you feel like the RFP was rushed out, that's a hint they don't really care about responses. If they don't give you good responses, I'd send them like 30 questions. Ask a bunch of detailed technical questions. And if you get a bunch of one-sentence answers back, they're telling you they don't care about your proposal, because they already moved them away. This is just procurement making them do an RFP. So they're going through the motion, but they already know either the agency they're talking to for a year, or their current vendor is going to get it. They give you back nice detail. You know, obviously, if the architect sat down and wrote really good detailed answers to all your questions, and spent some time on it, that's a very good sign. They really do want to see proposals. They really are trying to find somebody. Yes.
What's your best resource for finding RFPs?
There are a bunch of sites out there. RFPmark.com is the cheapest, and I haven't seen that there are actually any worse than expensive ones. I think it's 2 guys making them.
Okay.
But they've got some crawler built that just hits all the procurement sites and grabs their RFPs. And I've taken the free trial from these filter services many times for a month and compared it. And RFP market's got 95% of it.
And then do you, have you had success with email lists? And if so, where do you get them?
I'd never had success with that.
Just to add on to the question that you had regarding RFPs, if you are looking to work with the state of Massachusetts, you do have to be a vendor in the state. And there's a website called Combis. Go there, it's pretty easy to register, and then we have access as a vendor. But because of the pitch here, also set yourself up when you sign that up as a trainer as well as a service provider.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of states will, every so often, do an open call,
All right.
where they'll build sort of a short list. Texas just did one last year, right, where if you got on it, it was essentially a hunting license to sell to Texas agencies for the next 4 years, because they could buy from you without, based on the value, they could buy from you at certain levels without doing an RFP, because you're already pre-vetted by state. And a lot of the states will do that every few years, people have one with time to list. It does do the big end.
So you mentioned government stuff. I mean, is there any, have you had any success registering with SAM.gov?
Just by itself, no. The federal government, if they're doing a public RFP, it's literally the last resort. They never want to do that. The agencies have what they call purchasing vehicles. So they're big, huge contracts that cover everything from websites to office shares, half the time, right? And every 5 or 6 years, that will go out and a bunch of companies will compete. And there'll be like 50 companies that are eligible on this contract. Like there's one called SOUP, called Massive SOUP. And SOUP actually stood for Systems, something workstations and printers originally. They haven't changed the name of the contract. So if you're on NASA SOUP, that's what NASA uses. A lot of other agencies use it too. So they'll put out, an RFP and only people on NASA SOUP can answer it. Well, there's only like maybe 10, 12 companies on NASA SOUP that actually do websites. So if you're on that list, you're sort of automatically, better odds. GSA kind of does the same thing, but GSA is so big. Just being on GSA is worthless for the most part. What you have to do is get on GSA, then you go essentially do the one-on-one sale with the Department of Environmental Quality somewhere. And because you're on GSA, they can buy from you without an RFP, but you still have to do the whole sales process to get to the point of saying, yeah, I want you to build it, and we'll run it through GSA. If you're a small firm, your best bet honestly is to find a company in those contracts. Just be yourself. Not with ego. If your company is minority owned or woman owned, or service disabled veteran owned, 100% there'll be a sub for everybody because they always are looking. Contracts come out and they literally say 30% of the contract must be completed by a woman owned or a minority owned business, 10% must be completed by a service disabled veteran. So if you're on their list, they'll call you for those projects. Just check box. Yeah, federal contracting is the whole 6-week course, quite frankly, and how to win federal contract projects. Anything else?